dinner today. So a big
It's a commonplace that the final authority in Protestantism is the Bible. And the final authority in the Catholic Church is the Pope. The final authority in the Episcopal Church is the former rector. We've got lots of authority here. Former rectors. And I'm going to ask each of them to make a brief opening statement. They have carte blanche as to what they want to talk about, mostly themselves, I hope. And then we'll have some questions, including questions from the audience. John K., you start.
Thank you. Unaccustomed as I am to public speaking, I'm one of the two people up here who had the experience of being at Christ Church not once but twice, because 50 years ago today, I was ordained as a deacon in the Episcopal Church, and 50 years ago tomorrow, to the day, I arrived at Christ Church as the assistant to Reese Williams, who had already been the rector for about 6 years when I came to town. I had just graduated from General Theological Seminary, and Reese, as was his custom in those days, got me settled, packed his family into a station wagon, and as soon as the service the following Sunday was left, drove with his family to Maine and said, "I'll see you on Labor Day." I was 25 years old. I had no idea how to be in charge of the congregation. Well, everybody knew that I really wasn't in charge. I was simply filling the space up front. But it was probably one of the most remarkable times of my life. Because, and I've often wondered if he really knew what he was doing, because, you know, we talk about baptisms by fire, and I certainly had one. I was here for 4.5 years as assistant. I just very recently had my 75th birthday, and I've really only worked in 4 places. Poughkeepsie, and I went to graduate school and came back to Poughkeepsie as rector for 10 years. And from here, I went to be the education officer in the Episcopal Diocese of Panama. I spent 6 years. I always say that you know, the Israelites in Egypt had 7 fat years and 7 lean years. I had 3 fat years and 3 lean years, because halfway through my time in Panama, General Noriega took over the country, basically. And so I had the unusual experience of being invaded by my own country in 1989. The following year, I went to be a professor at a seminary in Berkeley, California, the Church Divinity School of the Pacific, which happens to be the alma mater both of Michael Phillips and his wife Sarah Phillips, as well as Bob and Edie Fortna, who some of you will remember from the old days at Christ Church. And I've been there ever since. And I keep sort of retiring, and I'm finally at the point where I'm down to teaching 2 weeks a year in June, and as soon as I go back from this trip, that will begin. The last part of my career, if you will, didn't begin until I had officially retired from the seminary, and that is that for the last almost 10 years now, I've been teaching 1 semester every year at the Anglican Seminary in Hong Kong, and have found that is an incredible experience. I think for me, the most remarkable thing about my life in the church as an ordained person has been the really remarkable way that every single thing that I've done has prepared me quite dramatically for the next thing that I do. Because Christ Church was what prepared me to go to Panama and prepare people for both lay and ordained ministry. Panama certainly prepared me to be a seminary professor, and being in Berkeley prepares you to be almost anything. But it certainly prepared me to go to a part of the world that I never never thought I'd ever even visit, much less make a kind of second home. But I've found that these last almost 10 years now that I've been going to Hong Kong have become a very rich and important part of my life, partly because that amazing spirit of openness to things that you never thought about before that Christ Church nurtures in its clergy and its congregations works when you go to a completely new part of the world and discover that people are Christians in a whole different way. Because as one of my students, I actually spent a semester teaching in Korea once, and one of my students said, well, he said, consciously I'm an Anglican, but unconsciously I'm a Buddhist. Nobody ever said that at Christ Church. But Christ Church is what got me ready to hear that and to respond to that, not with a shudder, but with a, my, that's interesting.
John is proof that baptism by fire is just about as good as by water. And I'm so glad he talked about the worldwide aspect of the church, because every one of these former rectors has had worldwide experience one way or another, and as well as our local experience. Next comes David Toomey, who was here from 1985 to 95. I hope I got that right. Okay,
Just about.
I've got the next set of numbers, I think.
So, I just want to say, first of all, wow, is it wonderful to be back with you and to be back in this community. I just said to someone coming in, Lillian Goldsberry coming in, it is just such a gas to be here. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, people of Christ Church. So 31 years ago, 19 years after John arrived, 31 years ago this weekend, I came to town with my wife Lindsay, and then 2 daughters, soon to be 3 daughters. We think, Lindsay and I think now back to the time at Christ Church very often, and in one very specific way that John has already alluded to. We, every day, are so appreciative and thankful and filled with gratitude for the way that you individually and institutionally supported me and us as we tried to do a lot of things at once. We tried to grow beautiful flowers and grass at the same time as we tried to grow beautiful children. And you made space for that. We tried to be faithful in our jobs and to each other in our marriage and family life. And you really made space for that. Thank you. Sam M. and the vestry did something remarkable in support of our life together. And that is, they said, please take a sabbatical. I hope that was a positive encouragement at the time, but they said, please take a sabbatical, and it allowed us to go to South Africa to take to run a parish in Soweto for a rector there who had had a very difficult time. This was in 1989 in a state of emergency. And it allowed us to continue some of the work that Lindsay and I had done in the anti-apartheid movement in this country, but had never been to South Africa. And just in the way that John alluded to the preparation of Christ Church, allowing the next step, your support as we were in South Africa on sabbatical, and your interest and support when we came home back to Christ Church for another 5 years, allowed us to then take the step where we were very fortunate and very blessed to be invited by the then Archbishop Desmond Tutu to return to South Africa to volunteer and work. And you know, I sometimes say in a glib moment in this racket, if someone like Desmond Tutu says, come, you want to pay attention. And so we did. And it was a terrific experience that changed us in every part of our life and of our children's lives. How did that happen? It happened because of the support and the nurture and the encouragement that you provided in sending us off on sabbatical and then incorporating so much of what we hope we brought back. So thank you very much. Since we were in South Africa for 9 years, from the time we left here, and we returned to Vermont, and now we live in Boston. My career changed at that time, although, as my bishop in South Africa said, there's something about the Holy Spirit that has enlivened another part of you, and give thanks for that and embrace it. When I went to South Africa, I was asked to work in small business development, to run the Department of Social Responsibility for the church with a South African. And it became very clear to me that I wanted more skills or needed more skills in order to do the job I was being asked to do well. So I completed a work in economics and received a PhD. Again, that work was in small business development, and since then, Lindsay and I have worked internationally as consultants and strategic advisors in small business development and economic growth, and Lindsay in healthcare systems development. And we've worked throughout Africa and Southeast Asia. It sounds as though that might be a big step from Christ Church. And from the deepest fiber of my being, I simply feel that what you helped call out is continuing to be expressed. So in that sense that the Holy Spirit works through all of us, the Spirit certainly works through you. We give great thanks, and we feel that enlivening Spirit still in a different and yet still similar way. Thanks very much.
Hello, my name is Michael Phillips. As I'm sitting here listening but also looking out, I think back of how many hundreds of Sundays I've been in a similar spot looking at your faces. And once again, here we are. It's a great honor and a great pleasure, as David mentioned, to be here with you today, this afternoon. So I'm going to want to reflect a little bit on my time at Christ Church. How many hours do I have? I could go on for a while. But so I'll just say a couple of main things. One of the things that I really appreciate about Christ Church is how serious and thoughtful the lay people here take their faith, how they're interested in their continuing education, development of their faith, deepening of their faith, and at the same time, just what a great sense of humor Christ Church had, and what a joy and what fun it is to be part of this community and to exercise faith and be active in faith in this environment. Now, a good example of that is, incidentally, I'm the other rector who has been here twice. Once as an associate for community ministry, coming in 1982. Sarah and I drove across the country from the West Coast. My job's a curate on the West Coast, and we arrived in early June, planning to start about the middle of June 15th. But a week or two before our arrival, the George St. George's School burned down. And so John Cater said, could you start a few days earlier, which I did. So working with John and for John was also a great pleasure. We had a common weekly exercise that on Monday morning we would get together for a sermon review. And we decided, for the sake of both of our egos, the preacher would critique first. So that the preacher had the opportunity to say, well, I could have done this differently or done that differently, rather than have the listener provide that information. More hard to take. But John and I preached some sermons, and what I remember, as years went on, you all have referred back to those. And one particular Advent sermon I remember, the first Sunday of Advent, John got up and began his sermon with the line, I say to you, not yet. Which is, Advent means the coming of Christ, the final coming of Christ has not yet occurred. So the next Sunday I got up and began my sermon with, John Cater says to you, not yet, I say to you, already. And I can't tell you how many times you all have said, remember this? And we had fun with that. And yet it's a very serious and important part of the Christian understanding and the practice of our faith in the world. So I came to Associate Community Ministry, and John went off to Panama. I stayed on as the interim, and then stayed on when you called David to be rector, and eventually went out to Chicago, came back as rector in 1995. And that time as rector here was a very difficult time in terms of IBM leaving the Hudson Valley, or downsizing dramatically in the Hudson Valley. And it was a struggle for us to keep going, but it was very important for us to remain in the city of Poughkeepsie. During the 20th century, Poughkeepsie began the 20th century with 4 Methodist churches in the city limits of Poughkeepsie. The city ended the 20th century with 0 Methodist churches within the city limits. And so we believed that it was extremely important for us as an Episcopal church and our partner in ministry, St. Paul's, to remain active and ministering in the city of Poughkeepsie. And that was one of the main sort of banners that we carried, was to continue to stay here and not leave the city. What was extremely part of our consciousness, and around that welcoming or increasing the welcome that had begun to the Spanish-speaking population in Poughkeepsie. That started under David Toomey's time, and that's Guadalupe congregation continues to meet here for worship. And our goal during my time was not to say to the people, you're not just guests in our house, but you're actually family. You're not just welcome here, you belong here. And so we did ESL classes, we helped people get driver's license, we helped people get jobs, we helped people acculturate to this foreign dominant culture to them, so that they could live worthwhile, productive lives here. And I just want to point out one thing. In the side chapel, I want to make sure everybody knows this. In the side chapel is an image of the Virgin of Juquila. Juquila is a city in southern Mexico, where a lot of people from Poughkeepsie come from. And that particular image of the Virgin does not belong to Christ Church. It is not yours. But the community, the Oaxacan community, determined that that Virgin, the image of the Virgin, should be at the place where they feel they have been made welcome. And they brought it in procession here one Sunday morning, and about 85 people showed up carrying the Virgin into this room, and said, we want this to be here in this place because you all have made us feel like this is our home. So that's why the Virgin is in the side chapel. And just a cautionary note, it could go someplace else. If we're not paying attention to the gospel of welcoming the stranger. So let me just say one more thing. When John went to teach at my alma mater, seminary in Berkeley, I would go out there for continuing education. Oh, and since he had a guest room, I would stay. So I visited John a number of times in California, and sometimes either before the classes or after it was over, we'd go off and tour around in California. I remember one night we'd gone up in the Redwoods, north of San Francisco, just to see Drake's Bay and all that. And we were staying in a motel among the Redwoods. And John and I had a conversation about parishes and churches and relationship between clergy and the congregation. And we both agreed that although we have been priests and pastors in a number of different congregations, and there would be more to come in the future, that on some level, Christ Church would always be our parish. As a priest, you don't get to have a parish. I mean, you work at parishes. But on some level, this is our parish. And I can't speak for John, but just to say that if he still feels that way, but I know I still feel this way. And part of that is because, and I'm going to get a little choked up on this, back in the columbarium are the remains of my in-laws, along with Celia Sullivan, Walter and Dottie Wagner, and many, many others who have been meaningful in my life. And just behind where I'm sitting, not quite 38 years ago, Sarah and I stood here with John and Kata behind us, and we committed to spend the rest of our lives to each other. So, in many ways, this is my parish, and it always will be. Thank you all for welcoming.
So John arrived 50 years ago this weekend. David arrived 31 years ago this weekend. I arrived 10 years ago this weekend to be your next to current rector, not last. Next to current rector. This was the first place I had been the rector, and it actually is the only place I've ever been the rector after 2 years of being a curate in Houston. So coming to the priesthood late, I had a lot to learn, and I would say without qualification that, just almost goes without saying, almost everything I learned about how to be a priest, I learned here, by hook or by crook, by accident or by design, by mistake or by well-laid plans. So I'm grateful and thankful in the way that my predecessor, Reverend Susan, will be someday, I'm sure, of what all I experienced here. When I left 2.5 years ago now, almost exactly, and went down to go to work for the bishop in the diocesan office, I continued to learn from Christ Church in that time. One of a task of mine that I run into at least 2 times a month is a parish who calls and says, "Our former rector won't stay away." Keeps interfering with our new rector. Or it'll be the wife of the former rector. Say, "My husband won't stay away." Or it'll be the former rector who calls and says, "Do you know about all the mistakes the new rector makes?" And I have to listen to all of those compassionately, and then tell them all they need to go back to their corner and mind their own business. And so here I am, the former rector of Christ Church, in the position I am as candidate ordinary, where I see Susan and Sean and Carla as wardens, and Michael as a trustee, And I see people from Christ Church all the time. I mean, not every week, but consistently in my new job. And you all, those of you who I do see, including Susan and all the ones I just named, continue to teach me how it is to be a former rector. And that is to not interfere, and to not gossip, and to not worry, and to not to meddle, and not let anyone else call and try to get me to meddle. And that has not happened. I can say at the home that no one does. So you continue to teach even after I've left. Another thing I realized, I went home, I don't know if my sister's in the room or not, but it might have been within the first 2 weeks. It was certainly within the first month. I came home and observed something. There's a phenomena that we have that I trust that all rectors have in their experience, and that's when you first arrive, that you have a honeymoon. When you can do nothing wrong, and the vestry can do nothing wrong, and the acolytes are perfect, and the altar guild irons beautifully, and the cookies are always fresh. And then soon enough, the balloon's off the rose, and you're not in the honeymoon. So after 10 working days or 15 working days and 78 phone calls and 300 emails, I went home to Debbie and said, I was on a honeymoon for 7 years in Poughkeepsie. The honeymoon never left. I mean, if not one of these nightmares that I am confronted with on some days at the office in other parishes did we ever experience. And none of those parishes I'm talking about that are in such great distress, none of them had 20 months to repair the rectory before someone could move in. None of them had a tower with stones falling off the roof. None of them had the roof fall in the day before the rector's first annual meeting. And none of them had the undercroft flood again the second time, the day before Sunday school started, after we couldn't use it for 18 months after the roof fell in. And so we lived together through all of those things that individually they were awful. There was nothing good about any of that. But it was still a honeymoon. Not that everybody was happy every second of every day. I wasn't. Vestry members, wardens, etc. weren't. But we never broke the path we were on, at least as far as I can tell. I don't think I'm living in a fantasy of mutual respect and care for and love for and hope for each other. And I can assure you, across the Diocese of New York, those words are not used to describe every rector and parish relationship across the board. And it was a stunning thing. So I don't when I'm in awful situations with rectors or treasurers or wardens or the head of the altar guild or the organist or the vestry or whatever, the flavor of the day is, I do my best to not say, well, back when I was in no priest can avoid that totally, The dean of the cathedral in Houston, where I was a curate, when the staff meeting would get too full of ourselves, the dean would say, well, one day in band camp, back when I was in junior high, and he would start on some story to shut the rest of us up. Appreciate it. It was a good technique of it. But so I don't hold you all up by name as the perfect place, because you're not, and we weren't when I was here. But at least in my interior life, I can reflect happily and hopefully on how we lived together and how we did incredible things together that were, some of them, just awful to have experienced. And yet, here we are. And so far, the roof hasn't fallen in again. Thanks be to God. Let's hope it never does. And so I'm thankful in countless ways to so many of you.
These rectors are going to make us feel so good about ourselves that we'll be hard to live with. So, to bring us back down to earth a bit, I'm going to invite each one of the former rectors to tell us not only about the high point of their experience here, but also, if they want to or dare to, the low point. But unless the low point is either humorous or instructive, you're free to omit that. We'll start with Blake this
Um, I guess there were, I'll take loosely license, there were two high points that come to mind that happened early in our life together. One was that first, maybe it was the second annual meeting, when we come to the realization that the center of the square, which for some of you that haven't been here even as long as I have, was a nonprofit the corporation that was formed that many of the outreach missions of the parish rolled out into in a hope that they would prosper better, get outside funding, corporate funding, etc. So the long-standing summer camp went to that, some feeding programs went to that, some ESL classes went to that. So a few years in here, I think maybe it was the second annual meeting, the board and the Center of the Square said, you know what, we're done. We can't, it didn't flourish like we hoped, and it's wearing us out, so we're going to wind down. And so there was the summer camp staring us in the face. And